Hey y'all, and welcome back to the Roompact ResEdChat podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Jas Nettles. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Associate Director for Residential Curriculum, Living Learning Communities, and Signature Events at Eastern Kentucky University. I have a special guest with me today to get into a conversation about sober spaces in higher education, a new path forward for student wellness. This is something that kind of sparked for me, just in general conversation, but I will let my guest go ahead and introduce herself.
Yes, hello. My name is Hayley Thomas. I am newly the Assistant Director of Wellbeing Initiatives at Baylor. I formerly served as Recovery Program Manager for the Beachman Addiction Recovery Center on campus, which is a collegiate recovery community that Baylor houses. Yeah.
Yeah. So Haley and I have been bestie sisters since 2018 when we met for grad school at the University of Central Arkansas. I'm pretty sure you're noticing a trend here if you've been watching my other episodes. But like I said, so in my conversations with Hay and talking about what her job actually was and being in Eastern Kentucky where the opioid or just the drug pandemic is starting to be more of a conversation, we talked a little bit about recovery programs on college campuses and what that looks like because that was something that I had absolutely no idea about. And while they're not new, it was definitely something new for me. So obviously, the intention behind a recovery program is to support students or students who are from families that are recovering from some type of substance abuse. And then these programs often are a part of a student affairs division or a wellness initiative, which I just think is very cool. And it provides resources to students such as different kinds of faculty and staff support, counseling, sober living spaces, so residence hall space, and recovery friendly social events. So I'm very excited to talk to Hay a little bit about that. So first, Haley, can you tell me about the recovery program at Baylor and just a little bit, maybe the name and just what the program was based around?
Yes, of course. We have the Beachman Addiction Recovery Center on campus. The reality, that is the name of the our recovery community. However, we personally are trying to shift that narrative because addiction actually does hold stigma with it and kind of does um, it just like students are not as encouraged to like use the resources because of that. So we're kind of walking through with the bark. We go by the bark. We really lean into the dog narrative and the name and everything as well. We were established. I don't want to lie because I just had the number in head, but we were established like maybe 5 or 7 years ago. The bark was. We kind of came to fruition because Baylor was, and this was again before my time. So I'm telling you history that I know of before my time. But there were alcohol anonymous meetings happening within the community, and so there was already a need kind of taking place, and so the institution was kind of seeking out a way to support students and like kind of help support that need that they saw growing. And so we were actually really blessed by. Beecham family who did a donation and was able to like with the money they donated, we were able to establish the bark, and now we continue supporting the bark through the donation they have. One thing that is a true like fun fact for us is that we do have an endowment, and so where other institutions may struggle establishing a recovery community, because it does come a lot of times it does come to what does come into play is a lot of networking and need to like
Right.
fundraise to finance
Mhm.
these. We are in a different position, and so I do like recognize the privilege in that. But we have been very supported by the Beecham family who donated for us to get this started.
Yep.
And now, later years down the road, we are kind of coming back into a stronger formative year because post-COVID, before COVID, the center was actually like really strong and like kind of had a community created and was going really strongly. Then post COVID, we kind of had shift in roles, lots of little chaos just built off of what COVID caused, and now we're kind of back in a space where we've established a strong community, more engagement from students, things of that nature. But that is how we're established, and our goal is
Yeah.
there is to support students and like what their experience looks like at Baylor if they
Yeah.
are navigating any kind of addiction. Um, whether that's alcohol use, drug use, or
Yeah.
my past supervisor, Jose Vallejo, who is an amazing individual, who actually is the director of the BARC,
Mhm.
he would say anything that has any life-controlling behaviors.
Okay.
So it's never just alcohol and drug use. Sometimes it's gaming, it's pornography, it's using your phone too much,
Mhm.
or not even be able to like set structure for yourself because you're prioritizing other things. And so that's something that we really lean into because the reality is everyone struggles with something.
Yep.
Drug use and alcohol use just have a harder stigma associated
Yeah.
with it. So,
Yeah, and I think I love that the program isn't just drug abuse, because I know when I first was getting introduced to it, that's all I thought it was drug or alcohol. And
mhm.
so having the conversation to learn that it can encompass so many different things, I think is really dope. And I know that you all have like dedicated space, right, for students to
Mhm.
do events. So with that, or just whatever the component of that is with the connection to housing, or just students who live on campus, can you maybe share some things that you think are key elements to make a program like this or an office or space like this successful?
Yeah, I think one thing too is we actually just did a 10-year review. We're trying to like revamp
Nice.
and like capitalize on what we already have and like find our areas of improvement. Our
Hmm.
department in general, which is the Department of Student Care and Wellbeing, which the BARC falls under. Um, so we actually just did a 10-year review because we want to make it better. And for us, the realization is we need a bigger space and a more
Hmm.
centralized space to be
Okay.
more successful, more fruitful, and just supporting more students. But the reality is our location now does serve us well because we are attached to a residence hall. It's not
Hmm.
a huge space. Oh, I regret not being in my office right now because I would show you all this space. Um, but with that, we are attached to a residence hall, and we do, and especially this year, we really intentionally planned and programmed and partnered with the residence halls to garner engagement. Because the reality is not everybody needs our services,
Right.
but everyone does need to know of our services because while everybody doesn't need them, everybody knows someone who does.
Right.
And so that was really our goal in this season. And I think the biggest piece is not siloing
Hmm.
because and as we know in higher ed, like that is like the death of the institution, or
Yeah.
that takes away the resources from students. Like you can't fully benefit them and support them unless we have these things built out and that we are collaborating. And so I think that a big piece for us was it's helpful being attached to a residence hall that supports what we're doing, and the hall director team that supports our efforts. Like I again loved our partners this past year, especially again because this is the year that I served in the
Hmm.
role. But a big piece is like you have to have investment from all players.
Yeah.
Because the reality is the BARC work is a lot of hard work and good work, but it can't just be my responsibility or Jose's responsibility to support these students. It
Hmm.
has to be everyone's. And like I think when we're working in this field, specifically in student affairs, that is literally our purpose,
Yeah.
is to come together to support students the best way we can. So it really is just buy-in from everyone.
Yeah. And honestly, that's a great segue into what my next question is going to be. So obviously the stigma around any type of drug abuse or any type of substance or any type of anything that is just not healthy or something that can translate into addiction, that's obviously not something, especially post COVID, that students do a really good job of asking for help for, or even just talking about whatever their experience has been with their families. So can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the ways your team used to or will still do? How do you do outreach to students that may not be necessarily seeking out the services, but you know the students are there? So to get them to come to events or just visit the center.
Yeah, so something that we really work intentionally with, and like and two things that we do, and there are nuances in this as well. So like all to say this, and I want to preface this before I speak any further. I don't know everything.
Yeah.
I'm not all consuming of knowledge. And like I will not always say the correct things when it comes to this work. Because again, I am still learning,
Mhm.
but we're taking really intentional steps to make sure students know of our resources by doing external programming,
Mhm.
large scale programming to bring people in so they're aware of us, and then smaller scale programming for the people that are actually a part of the program or that need our services. Another piece of that to get people connected is so we utilize our care team and our conduct office.
Okay.
Um, and I do think there is some nuance with the conduct piece because we
Mhm.
have it where we have these wellness consultations that take place. So if a student gets in trouble or is cited for excess alcohol or coming in the hospital, they do have to come and check in
Mhm.
with or often the judicial affairs will send them to like check in with someone for a wellness consultation to complete their what's the word?
Like an intake or something,
Yeah, to
or
complete
an
their whatever
evaluation.
their
Mhm.
yeah, I don't want to say penalty because it's not the word I'm trying to use, but to complete like
Oh, a sanction.
their sanction. Oh,
Hmm.
yes, girl, their sanction. And so that one has been a little more challenging in the sense that like the students are not seeking out our support and they're really
Right.
just trying to check a box. But our spirit and is like our spirit and intention is that like because they now have been connected to us, like if they do need something or if they ever are in a space where they need support, they know that they can in fact come to us and not in a space of just because like they're in trouble or
Yeah.
something. When it comes to
Yes.
care team, I will say like I think most institutions now have a care team, and I will say like our care team is phenomenal. And honestly, I wish there were 1,000 of them because the work they do is just top tier work, but also really hard work, and they have such
Yeah.
big caseloads. But they do a really good job, and I think a lot of the students that really embrace the bark and like their recovery journey are students who the care team have been contacted,
Mhm.
and they connect us to the student. So if we have a student that is struggling and maybe a professor notices that that student is struggling, they'll put in like a report. The care team will reach out and meet with the student and then like, hey, here are some resources that are going to be helpful. And if like they can connect with them on something, or like
Yeah.
if they kind of talk about drug use, alcohol use, or gaming, anything that is like they're
Nice.
struggling with when it comes to life controlling behaviors, they will connect them with us and then we will consult with them and meet with them. And usually the students are really willing and wanting to do that.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's probably the biggest piece of how we get students to intentionally be there.
Yeah.
If we notice the students having several violations or struggling with several things, we will be intentional about checking in with them
Mhm.
as someone reaches out. Something that we've also been super mindful of in this season is like really partnering with like multicultural affairs, Greek life, student activities, like people who see students on the
On a
front
regular
line
basis. Hmm.
often and
Yeah.
can see like, hey, I know this person may be struggling. And so sometimes they may tell us and we'll check in on them, but oftentimes they will tell the student and the students will come to us and chat and check in or just even just observe the space. Um, I'm sure like we'll talk about stigma in a little bit, I'm sure, but like we
Yeah.
do some things to kind of navigate that. So
Yeah. And so honestly, that's like I said, the my entire intrigue for the whole thing, even though I know that any type of life changing or life controlling behavior, it's specific to the person. I've always, I was curious when they first started talking about it on our campus, what does that look like from an outreach standpoint, especially because students would just rather not get the help, or they would rather, we've just experienced such a high volume of students who prefer to just suffer in silence. Even if it's not them directly, it's definitely like if it's a family member or a sibling or something. But I'm curious because I know, I mean, we're friends on social media, so I see the stuff that you do. Do you all have like traditional events or anything specific that you do that is like large scale or small from a programming standpoint that's worked really well and
Mhm.
has kept the students engaged that you just enjoyed, or maybe just your favorite one?
Yeah, I think, well, there are probably a couple things that we do, and you know, I'll chat all day. So I'll try to be mindful. But a big thing that we do is we do Recovery Week, which is typically takes place in April. April, I think the 15th was the National Collegiate Recovery Day. And so we always program large scale on that day, but we take the whole week to celebrate recovery because the reality is like going on a recovery journey is a huge deal and it's not easy, especially when you think that a college student committing to recovery is
While
so
they're
young
in school? Yeah.
while they're
Hmm.
in school and they're
Yeah.
so young. And this commitment is usually like a lifelong thing. And honestly, one thing that we're really mindful of is we don't define recovery for a student because the
Nice.
reality is we have a plethora of students who are like, I'm maybe, and Jose, former supervisor, assistant director of the BARC, again, great resource. He often says like there can be students that come in, they're like, I'm currently drinking 40 beers a day.
Mm.
I don't want to drink 40 beers a day. I want to drink 5 beers a week or something, or like shift it. And sometimes recovery for someone is not abstinence, and we
Right.
can't define that for a student, but we're there to help coach them on that path. So just want to preface that too. But for Recovery Week, we do large scale programming. I think this past year was like really, really fun. We did a lot of fun stuff. Our big thing is we did Boogie and Boil, where we just
Hmm.
celebrated everyone's journey and those who are in recovery. And we did like a banner that was like recovery is, and like all the students that came signed it. And it's not just students who are in recovery, but we like call them like recovery allies or people who are supporting people in recovery or people who have family members that are in recovery. And we all just celebrated and it was like really high attendance, really good vibes, but also just a way to get the bark out there and know that that's a resource that collegiate community exists.
Yeah.
Another thing that my past supervisor does really well in our residence chaplain, I'm not a residence chaplain, our recovery chaplain, who
Hmm.
is a grad chaplain that works in the BART, Katie
Hmm.
Macy. I did tell them I'd say their names because they really do great work. They
Good.
really do. Um, but she uh lost my train of thought. But they, oh yeah, they do. are really good at implementing like internal events that are going on. So like just casual hangouts and game nights for people who are actively in recovery because we want to
Mhm.
make sure that they have community. The goal of a collegiate recovery situation and community should always be community because that is
Mhm.
what is most needed for people who are navigating recovery. Because there's a lot of loneliness in that, there's a lot of shame in that, and
Mhm.
it's a lot of times unwarranted, and you don't just don't have they just don't have the support of people around them to like know it's
Yeah.
okay to be navigating something. And then something else that we've done recently that we were going to make a tradition is we have this day called Dia del Oso for Baylor, where it's Day of the Bear. And a lot of students they go out, we have no classes on that day, but sometimes idle hands can get into trouble.
Yeah.
And so we like to create an alternative option for students to engage in like fun that doesn't necessarily have like alcohol and stuff involved at that evening and night because usually we do a lot of events during the day as staff and faculty for the students, as well as our student orgs.
Mhm.
But that night, like we cannot control what they're going to do. And so we've started doing this where we have a movie night, Meet the Bark at Cinemark. And so any student that wants to engage in like sober fun and like have a good time with community still, like we pay for a movie ticket,
Nice.
and we just have rent out a whole theater and have a movie experience there. And like that was something that we did this year that was really effective and really fun. And so there are several things. Next year, we're hoping to try to do a sober fest going into the end of September into October, just because we all know that October into November is homecoming season on top of Halloween and just a lot of partying that does take place in the normal college calendar. And
Yeah.
so we like to do preventative information there as well. And then the final thing that I say is probably the most effective in intentional, sorry, not a child day,
You
but
were right.
tabling. It's tabling. Like
Nice.
being in spaces where students are and giving them the information is important. So our student workers do go out and table in the residence halls, table in the dining halls, and just let people know of our resources. And also we do preventative education if we know some big events are coming up, but also
Yeah.
alternative education for resources for otherwise.
Peace. I love that. And I think sometimes, especially I know in the pre-meeting that we had, there was a lot of there were a lot of players involved in it. And from a programming standpoint, there really weren't many on the group call other than housing who had that background. And so I know the conversations we had to have about reminding people like, yes, you want to do this because this is an issue, but the community part of it, if you don't include the programming and the social in the proposal, there is not going to be included after the fact. And so
Mhm.
I love that that's the primary or the nexus of that for Bark or just at Baylor in general. And so leading into my next question, I think that I think another reason why I was so intrigued by it because Baylor is a private Christian university. And so I was very surprised that there are dedicated resources to something like that. So can you talk maybe about the stigma that's on campus around Bark, whether it's positive or negative, or just what the community of your students looks like when it comes to existing on Baylor's campus and being somebody who regularly attends or visits the Bark?
Absolutely. So one thing I'll say is always explain to me and people like, we're surprised that, and you're not alone, because even people
Yeah.
on campus are always like, we're surprised that we have like a collegiate recovery community on campus. And it's like, as a private Christian institution or as a Christian institution in general, like that should be what we're doing. The work we're doing is to support and help all of us, and to love all of us and to care for all of us. And so why would we not have this resource? You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
absolutely.
I feel like if we're doing the Lord's work, that's a part of it.
Hmm.
Um, my professional opinion. But there is a lot of stigma associated. There can be a lot of stigma associated with addiction recovery. Because again, as I said before, everyone struggles with something, but the things that are highlighted, like alcohol and drug use and um, just certain things are elevated in a negative way, are more frowned upon, and that's the reality. But you can have just as big of an issue with being on your phone or shopping or things like that, and you have less of a stigma associated with it.
Hmm.
Um, and something that we do is we really do try to navigate that well by being intentional about our programming for everybody.
Yeah.
And that's why we do that large scale programming. So everybody sees this as a space that they can come into. We also make the BARC a very open space. Like, so students want to come hang out and study and check in, they can. They don't have to be someone actively in recovery to come spend time in the BARC. And we encourage that because we don't want people to feel like if they go into the BARC that they're outing themselves as somebody in recovery.
Nice.
And so that's why those partnerships and collaborations are so important because we will have faculty and staff from other areas just come by and drop in and just check in, say, hey, I'm going to the BARC to check in with Hayley or Jose or
Nice.
whatever that looks like. And that happens with our staff. And then it starts trickling down to our students who go like, hey, I'm just going to go check in and see what Haley's up to, or Jose's up to, or Katie's up to. And it takes away the stigma associated with it because you're not outing yourself as somebody in recovery. You're just someone who's going to see someone, like you're going to facilitate community. I think that's really important because, again, addiction is a big piece. So anyone that is establishing a collegiate recovery community, I feel like Jose would say this, my supervisor Megan Becker would say this, that the goal would be if you establish something to make sure that you're thinking about the language you're using.
Yeah.
Because for us, like we are hoping to at some point change the name of the BARC from being the Beecham Addiction Recovery Center to still being the BARC and still having the Beecham's name in it, but we don't want addiction in the title because it does have such a negative stigma. And it's like we can't control that narrative,
Right.
but we
Yeah.
can control the experience around that and like how people come in and out of our spaces and feel supported in our spaces. But that is a big thing. So the large scale programming, knowing like we program for everyone, but then we do more intentional programming. I am a professional. More intentional programming for the students within the BARC that have community. Another thing that we do that kind of helps facilitate the community that we have is we do have group meetings. So we have our one key meeting, which is basically Alcohol Anonymous. We have that later in the evening. Our offices open from 8 to 7 p.m., but 7 p.m. is a cutoff because we have meetings in there in that space that's more anonymous, so people don't have to feel like they're like outing themselves. But we also have NAMI, which is a mental health alliance group that meets. One Key, that's the first one. We have Living Room, which is just basically a space to talk through experiences with family or friends that are navigating addiction and things of that nature. So we have all those groups and they're peer led. And that probably is going to
Wow.
be the key piece.
Yeah.
When I think about all the work that we did at the BARC, it does not function without students supporting students.
Yeah.
Me and you can talk all day to a student that needs support till we're blue in the face, but they are going to feel like you don't know my plight, you don't know my experience, you're old, what are you doing? Even though we know,
100%.
but they don't feel the same way. But when you have these peer-to-peer conversations, they feel way more supported and understood by someone who has that lived experience and can walk alongside them.
Yeah.
And so all of the groups that we do outside of the BARC are peer-led. And they're often by students navigating recovery themselves or students who are passionate about helping others through recovery. And that's probably the key piece to our success in our area.
I love that. And that is so peer led is crazy, I think, because I don't even think there was a consideration of that. Because I know in our conversations, it was all about the staff you have to pay and X, Y, and Z. And while I'm sure the peer students still get some type of compensation, it never even occurred to me that a peer led session was an option or maybe something that other institutions have considered. So that's good for me to file away just in case that's something that I can help with this year. I love it. Yeah. So my last formal question for you, do you have a success story or a student that stands out to you the most from your time when you worked at BARC that you'd be willing to share with us before I wrap us up?
I'll share about a student. I won't say their name because I don't know how come they'd be about it. But I do have a student success story that a student that I genuinely admire and that developed a really great relationship with, and I'm always proud of her. And I honestly think that she is one of the faces of the BARC. And she doesn't have to be that. And I tell her all the time, you don't have to be the face because in her journey, being the face of something, she has to consistently out herself as someone in recovery. And I don't think that's always fair, but I'm always proud because she's willing to do that to help someone else. But she struggled as a student in her freshman year. I guess navigated a couple conduct issues within the residence halls for alcohol use and things like that. and I don't know if her, I wasn't a part of her full journey, but I got to hear her story and like, and then walk alongside her now.
Yeah.
But she got in trouble a few times, and then she had basically, I think, had to do like a wellness consultation,
Mhm.
which is what happens after you go through a conduct process. And they're like, in order for you to be
Mhm.
just like, again, the wellness consultations that we discussed
Yeah.
earlier that aren't always great and are frowned upon because it seems like a penalty. But
Right.
um, at one point, I believe she came to the bark, did her little consultation, and was like good on it. And
Mhm.
then Jose, who's really intentional and who genuinely believes in giving people an opportunity to like be successful and to have community, was like offered her a job and was like, "Do you want a job? Do you need a job?" And at first, no interest. And then
Yeah.
I think eventually she found her recovery, like found her way back, and she was like, "Yep, I want a job." And
Mhm.
so having the job, having that risk, and that's the thing too, I would always say to faculty and staff too, is like, you've got to take chances on these students because you don't know. You like don't know what their experience is gonna be. And there will be students who make mistakes and mess up and let you down. But at the end of the day, we're here to help them figure it out, not the
Yeah.
other way around. But she ended up coming back to the bark, and now she is doing all the things that need to be done. She's currently doing peer support ally training. She leads one of the groups. She's always advocating and talking to students. She helps leads out in presentations and outreach, learning how to do Narcan training, which is something that our office also does. Leads out on doing that, and has really just been a shining star. And now they are wanting her to be a mentor for the Peer Ally program that she is currently working in and working on. And so it's good to see someone like get so invested in their
Yeah.
journey that they become like fully like just engrossed in it. And even
Yeah.
at times I have to be like, my girl, like your
Pump your
whole life
brakes.
doesn't, yeah, you don't, your
Yeah.
whole life doesn't have to be this unless you want it to be it. But
Mhm.
she just feels so passionate about helping people with the experience that she's had. Um, and yeah, she's a phenomenal student, and I love that girl. So
Yeah.
she definitely is, I think, one of the like shining examples.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, honestly, but even what you said though, what has that not been for us other than student affairs? That's exactly what student
Mhm.
affairs is for. And I love that that is literally the tradition. It doesn't matter what the functional area is, you really never know how you're going to connect to a student. And sometimes I know some of my favorite students are students I met in conduct situations or crisis situations. So, and still talk to them to this day, or just any type of relationship I have with them. But I think if the something that I want to make sure I ask before I do a wrap up, if there was any piece of advice for someone looking to do this kind of work, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I would say get in the research. The reality is recovery world is a journey.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of information and a lot of data out there because there's even the argument of, is it a disease? Is addiction a disease?
Mhm.
Is it like, and there's so much nuance in between it. But I think the reality is like, if you're interested in recovery work and knowing and walking along students in their journey and like have that desire, one, you're gonna have to humble yourself because the reality is if you're not someone who's navigated recovery yourself,
You don't know. Yeah.
you don't know their struggle and you can't say that you do. And it comes from a plethora of areas, but also just be mindful that their journey is going to have dips and that like recovery, we always say recovery is not linear. And so you cannot expect that from a student, but walking alongside them and being with them in the lows is going to be very important. I would attach myself to some professional organizations, which I know we talked about earlier, and I don't want to say the name wrong, so, but Archie, all those things are going to be
Yeah.
really good resources. If you haven't been to NASPA Strategies, I'm going to plug NASPA real quick. Wonderful conference. I went first time last year. There's so much information about recovery communities. There's so much information about wellness and well-being, and there's so many people who are willing to pour into that.
Mhm.
And there's so much about AOD in general, alcohol and drug use. And so I just think that's a great place to kind of get started if you have interest. And then also, if you're building it out, building a community out, lean into your students and your peer support systems because the students champion each other, and if we can get them to do that, then it's going to be successful. But that would probably be the biggest pieces.
Yeah.
Ah, and don't lose the focus is community. It
Yeah.
really is.
Yeah.
It
And
really
I,
is.
as someone who's never experienced that, but has a experience or connection tied to my family with addiction, I don't think we consider the community part because the the knee-jerk reaction to someone who struggles with addiction and maybe doesn't want to go into recovery and stuff like that is to abandon them. And so I think that's just culturally and just socially in general. But I love that is the nexus, like I said earlier. So, hey, thank you. Of course, always, it's a good time to chat. I want to end this with just a little bit of information and just some hotline information for y'all. So according to the 2023 United States National Survey on Drug Use and Health, it's NSDUH, 48.5 million or 16.7% of Americans aged 12 and older battled with some sort of substance use disorder in the past year. That's a high number. And I encourage my people who listen to this podcast or just who do the student affairs work to be aware of those stats in your community. It's not your job to take it on to save the world, but it is your job to know. So if you know someone or if you yourself are struggling with any type of abuse or life controlling behavior, please do not hesitate to call 988, which is the crisis hotline for assistance. Thank y'all so much for joining me on another episode of the Roompact ResEdChat podcast. I'll see y'all next time. Bye.